Hi, and welcome to Soul and Science, a podcast on uniting Western psychology with Eastern wisdom. My name is Nyana, and I am a psychotherapist residing in India and in conversation with Ardaas ji, who is an international trainer in yogic wisdom, and he is from Portugal. We invite you to embark on a profound exploration of the human journey with us. We integrate scientific insights into the mind with Eastern wisdom on life's polarities, paradoxes, and boundless nature to uncover a deeper understanding of our existence. Season 1, we begin with the exploration of relationships and the part that leads back to the self. Why relationships? We are constantly engaging in relationships with everything around us, from people to our environment. While we usually focus on relationships between two people, the most profound relationship we have is with ourselves. How many of us are truly aware of this relationship we have? Do we nurture it, trust, love, and respect it? Or are we living in fear and rejection of self, waiting to be validated externally? So join us as we go deep dive into the relationship with our mind, our body, and our spirit. Hi, and welcome everyone to our episode of Soul and Science. And today we're going to be talking to you about conscious choice, awareness, and truth. This is a topic that I really love. And Ardaas ji and I have been going over it in different ways and talking about it, touching upon it in our previous episodes. And really, here we are finally to talk about truth, conscious choice, and awareness. So, Ardashji, you were sharing that you were looking for a definition of truth on the internet, and you shared some really funny anecdotes, and I thought it would be a great place for you to start with that.
So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us, tuning in. And yes, it's funny because when you are defining something, I mean, we are trying to start this podcast with a definition so that we have a starting point. And when you define something, you are supposed to give the characteristics of that thing so that we know what we are talking about. And I was looking for truth in the internet, and the dictionary, the general dictionary says, truth is the quality or state of being true. And truth is a fact or belief that is accepted as true. And it's like, what? What kind of definition is that? This is like saying a chair is the thing that we all call a chair. Of course, it's a chair. So no, it seems so silly. I think that's called a circular definition, where the element that you're trying to define is contained within the definition itself. And it shouldn't be like that. Normally, when we are defining things, we shouldn't use the very same element. Anyway, I found another one that is more appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
That is that which is true in accordance with fact or reality. But again, truth is that which is true. So it's utilizing the same word, but at least it's bringing something else in accordance with fact or reality. So I'm not very pleased with the definitions that we already have prepared. But then that also springs a new question, which is what is truth? Sorry, what is reality? And
Yes.
what is facts?
Yes.
So I'm afraid we don't have a very good starting point for today's discussion. We're going to have to figure out our own definition in a way, probably.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is because this is it's interesting that it's very difficult to fully grasp truth in that sense. But I'll just talk about it from the psychology perspective first, maybe, because it's nuanced, right? Because when we look at truth in psychology, we look at facts of what happened. Example, there is a glass on the table, or I walk down this road, right? I walk down this road that I love. Is is that truth?
Well, we don't know about the love.
So in psychology, we say, okay, you walk down a road, that is the fact, and that is the truth. And it's based purely on that, and that everything you layer over it, whether it's a nice road, whether you love it, whatever you add on it are interpretations, perceptions, and opinions. Um, which layer and filter what is the fact of what happened, which is just that you walk down a road.
Already, by what you are saying, you may think that's a road, and somebody from a different country may think that's a highway, or another one we think it's just a little path, a dirt path. That's not even a road. So
Absolutely.
even that, whether we consider that that's a fact,
Yes,
well, that's a matter of perception as well, no?
absolutely. And definition depending on where you come from. And so then the fact becomes only smaller that I walked,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I'm thinking of the old story, the Indian story. You know, you are Indian, so you will tell us better. But you know, the I think it's like the four blind people touching an elephant.
Yes.
Can you
Yes.
can you tell us that one? It's quite funny.
I don't, I mean, this is when I was a child, but the funny thing is that you brought this up because I only understood the nature of the story much only in the last few years, because there's a story that are four blind men, they come across an elephant. They don't know, obviously, it's an elephant. They're blind and they all touch the four different legs. And one person says it's a tree. Oh my God, it's a tree. Somebody says it's a rock. One person touches the tail and it says it's a snake. Um, and the other two find, it's a house, it's a tower. And there's the fourth one that calls it something else. And that they all are sort of got their own definition and experience of what they are having with the same elephant's 4 feet, and
Right,
how that changes, and that each one considers it to be their truth or truth, because
correct.
this is what I experience. Of course, in this case they're four blind men, but it's really really interesting because I started realizing, oh yeah, but we are also sort of blind because we're unconscious of what experience of the past, or what we have considered an interpretation, perception based on our culture, conditioning, etc., that's getting in the way from us fully experiencing what is in this current moment. So, me
And
talking.
also not just the unconscious, like you call it, but in general, we have blind spots,
Mhm.
physically and metaphorically. So physically, there's parts that we cannot see with our eyes, like when you're driving, you have to be careful. But
Yes.
also with our minds, there's things that we don't perceive, and not just because we are biased by our subconscious, but because just we don't notice that, we don't perceive it. So there, we are blind in many ways.
And for most part, I think you're blind. We are blind to our own selves, right? It's easier to observe another and far harder to observe the self, and that's, I think, the whole journey of psychology and yogic wisdom, is to go inward and build, which I thought was interesting, was insight, as we call it, the sight within, the
Mm-hmm.
insight versus the sight outside. And that what we then therefore perceive outside to be truth versus what is within, which is truth, which in psychology we don't consider. We do consider the insight to be, hey, how is my experiences of the past, trauma, wounds, conditioning currently creating a filter of interpretation, or opinion, perception on this current situation, which may or may not be the actual fact of that situation. Which I think is maybe a way to that psychology looks at it, or is the way that psychology really looks at truth. And then, of course, there's philosophy that goes into its own definition of truth, and that it is got to do with alignment with your experience, whether it has congruence, whether it has consistency, whether it's coherent, and its usefulness. And it's interesting because that's the extent to which the words are around truth. But I know that the yogic wisdom has a deeper understanding of that, and was wondering how um, ancient wisdom or yogic wisdom really looks at that. That could help us probably get an insight into the word truth.
Well, there is this concept of satya. right? That's the concept of truth in yogic language. We would say satya. And I was just considering, as you were speaking about this, the inner part of us and the truth of ourselves within ourselves, and I was considering, well, it's possible that the one who is closer to their inner truth is the one who is more capable of perceiving reality as it is, because there's less bias, there's less subconscious or unconscious narratives. Like we were talking on the first podcast about these narratives which cloud our judgment of what is out there. So what we perceive as a fact is going to be clouded already by those narratives. But the one who is closer to their true self, I'm using the word true within this sentence already, but the one who is closer to the truth within is the one who is going beyond those narratives, which gives us a skewed perception. And therefore, those are going to be closer to perceiving the truth as what it is. From the yogic perspective, there is not just one concept of truth. There is three levels of truth, which is funny because we find three levels in so many things, right? We already talked about three levels in a number of different circumstances. In the
Absolutely.
context of truth, we talk about individual truth, circumstantial, what's that, or collective truth, it's called, and then the universal truth. And the individual truth is something that is true for me right now, today, and that is personal, is individual, and it's not transferable. So it might be different from for you. The very same thing that we are perceiving, even if we are perceiving the same thing, your truth, excuse me, what you perceive as truth about that thing will be different from what I perceive as truth. And actually, it could be different tomorrow from what is right now, because we are evolving as beings. So we change, and so our perspective will change. And that's an individual truth. And I would say that's the closest to bias. That's the one that is closer to there being some bias and linked to our own narrative, but also our own blind spots, which, in the eye, we know where they are physically, but psychologically, it's not so easy to see, because maybe your blind spots will be different from mine. If we read the same text, some things you will just not pay attention, and other things I will not pay any attention. I will just not see them. And this happens. We can all relate to this experience of going back to another book and reading it again, and suddenly realizing that they are saying something they had not read before. But my eyes have been gone through these lines before. Why did I not see this before? So we were blind to that concept. No, maybe not because we have anything against that, but it's just we are not ready or available to receive that. Then there is the collective and circumstantial truth, which is something that is true right now in these circumstances, and we can all agree to that. And that's very much linked to society and culture and or family. There is a truth within the family. We all understand that that was true, and is within that group. Outside of that group will not be considered true, but within the group, we all agree that's what happened. So that's like a fact for us. And again, fact is so weak, because we perceive things, and we may say that's a fact, but well, is it a fact? And even, some people will say, well, facts adhere to some laws and properties that we can measure and judge through physics and mathematics, which is the things that we have closer to understanding truth. Mathematics, the word math comes from essence of the essence, math meaning essence. So trying to find the essence of things, that's like trying to find the truth. And mathematics is a good way to express things which we can measure. And if we measure it today and we measure it tomorrow and the day after, we can say, oh yes, it's true, because it's happening always. And that's a thing that I like to take, and I will bring it back again. But even mathematics and even physics, or especially physics, sometimes we observe something and we create a law that describes it and seems to describe it pretty well. But as science advances, then we prove that was not true. And even though that law seemed to adhere to what we were observing as fact, Later on, we observed that actually that was not true, and there is a more closer approximation, which at the end is going to have to be that, an approximation to what is really happening.
Mm.
So even within circumstantial facts that, or let's say the field of science accepts that this is true right now, like the Earth being in the center of the universe, these kind of ideas, which could be accepted for a long time, eventually they can be proven wrong.
Mm.
And now there is the third level. The third level is the universal truth. And those are things which are true universally for everyone and for everything and for any time, and not always accessible directly as people, because we don't necessarily have an immediate capacity to access those truths, because they are universal, and sometimes we may not perceive that, but they are there, and they are affecting us whether we believe in them or not. They are.
Mm.
That's how they exist. And as you were explaining the example of the elephant, I was thinking of Ganesha and how it's a symbol of, for God. And, different people will approach Ganesha and have a different relationship to Ganesha, just like people may have different approaches to God. And one will say, oh, it's like a big tree, and another one is like a snake,
Mm.
so they may perceive God in different ways. And for them, it may be true, but it's also linked to a matter of faith, which actually the word truth, I believe, in the etymology of it, there is a connection to some German root with some word with faith, something related to faith. So we believe that it's true, and that's how it can become true. But even our relationship to something that is universal, God, if we talk about God as something universal, our perception of that will be a personal level of truth. How does that sound?
It left me silent, so it must be the truth.
Even in yoga, we utilize the symbol of Om,
Mm.
and we say it's the vibration that is everywhere and it's been there since the beginning of time, the beginning of the universe, and it permeates everything. And out of that Om, the whole creation started. But Om is also represented as an elephant. The symbol of the Om is similar to an elephant, the elephant face, Ganesha's face. So we could also say that our perception of Om, and when we vibrate Om, we have a different experience, and that's our personal truth in relationship to that Om.
Right, so there's a universal truth and there's an individual experience in relation to that universal truth.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. I think it's the truth for anything that you experience that is considered, for example, seasons, or which are always, and that's the truth is winter. Everybody experiences that experience of winter, for example, in their own individual way and truth.
correct.
Which takes me to the thing on individual truth, because I think that's where most of us get caught up between truth, opinion, perception, and believe that whatever we think and whatever we say is the truth, right? And then that's where a lot of the disconnection, disruption, and relations happen, because we consider every thought and everything we're saying to be truth, because yes, it is my truth. And when someone says, hey, but that may not be, then we've become very defensive of that experience,
Right,
because that's what I've experienced and therefore that is my truth.
right.
And how the reason why I'm saying this is because it's so psychology. That's what happens in sessions, right? That
Hmm.
but I experienced that in a certain way. For example, I was talking to Ardaas ji and he looked away, and that is so insulting, and I felt sad. And
Mm.
that the only truth in that is Ardaas ji looked somewhere while I was speaking to, but then the interpretation of that, or I judged it to be insulting and I interpreted it to be insulting, therefore I felt sad. And that comes from a lot of my narratives and a lot of the biases and the blind spots. And that is actually not, if you were to ask Ardaas ji for his truth, he would say, but I wasn't trying to insult you. And that's where the breakdown occurs and happens between two people, is when we're not aware that we both can have individual truths.
Right. And not only in the interpretation, but also in the perception, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yes.
I think there is some experiments, some psychological experiments which prove that we misremember things or misexperience things that and that's, for example, when somebody excuse me, is present in a crime, the police should intervene very, very quickly to that person because time matters. And the kind of questions that they ask matters as well, because they can influence the answer. And not only the answer, but they can influence the memory that is created in the other person. So if they start asking about some question about ethnicity or the shape of the whatever, they can be subtly putting messages of what could be there. And then the person eventually ends up remembering that what the policeman was asking about. So our memories are very highly influenceable, which in a way is a good thing because that means that we can mold our our toxic memories. Let's say the memories that we have inside that we don't like, we can change them. There's a possibility for that, but also to not just rely on what you remember. I remember this is what happened. Well, that doesn't mean it's true, and that even doesn't make it a fact. No? Did it
Yes.
really happen?
Yes.
And then if even if it did, so even if the perception was right, how do you interpret that? No, so that's the other level. So there's the both levels happening there.
Yes. And that's really interesting in psychology and therapy. And I'm noticing that the more you look at that, the more you'll find that memory, and therefore in the work that we do with compassion and inquiry, it's so much about focusing on the emotion and the feeling, and not on the story or the narrative. That when you can understand that this narrative has been a long time, and that we can change the belief in that moment and say, is that the truth? That's actually a question that you ask in therapy. um, and are you sure it is the absolute truth? And then you look at possible other interpretations of what it could be, and therefore what is the truth, and you re-look at whether that interpretation or that narrative is the truth. And when you can see that there could be other, and that this comes possibly from an older experience or something that is like sort of flavored the water at this point of time, that therefore we're not seeing it clearly, that when we are able to take away these perceptions and limiting beliefs, then there is more clarity in the water, right? And then you're starting to see things more clearly, which brings me to awareness. uh,
Mhm.
and that the ability of the, like you had talked about truth, we had talked about truth and insight, that where am I observing this from, and who is observing it? And that when I'm able to observe it from the true self or from the witness, then what is the quality of that experience, of that truth?
Mhm.
It almost is like the client or the person is able to see already a different, and it's largely neutral.
Yes.
And that then becomes neutral, because I remember at the beginning of my own therapeutic journey, there was always this thing that, you know, it's benign. And I was like, no, it can't be benign. It's so painful. How can things be benign? And as the whole journey of meditation, Kundalini yoga, therapy has been continuing, the perspective of when you start connecting to your observer or your neutral mind, or we call wise mind, or your true self, things seem to be more come across as neutral and benign. And then you're able to observe or be present with what is, without the interpretation and language of judgment and things that we kind of put on top of it. And then the experience of that itself changes. Of that same experience that had a charge before, now the experience of that is different.
Because we are different. Right. Yeah. I'm going to take a few of your words that you are using. Yeah. This present. You're talking about the present. You're talking about awareness and the consciousness of choosing to see something as benign or not. yesterday I was reflecting on fear,
Mm.
and because Halloween is coming, so I did a special video on fear on YouTube, and I was reflecting how when we get afraid, when something is really scary happening, and we were not expecting it, it's like a big surprise, like a dog barking very close to you, and you didn't even notice he was there. The experience of the fear brings you right to the present, and for a moment, as you breathe in and you hold the breath, you stay still and you listen, because the very act of surprise, opening the eyes, opening the mouth to listen better, to see better, is opening all your perception, and then you're silent for that moment. You don't think, you
Mm.
are just fully aware to see if there is some danger that I have to run away from or I have to fight. So fear is a very powerful, and generally we associate it with something evil.
Mm.
I connect fear with pain. You were talking about pain, but pain, just like fear, has the same effect, that it brings us right to the moment. We
Mm.
may be distracted, we may be thinking about anything else, then suddenly pain comes and we are right in the present. And it is not a coincidence that in English we utilize the word present as a gift as
Mm.
well, something that is a gift given. Yeah. And now connecting this, I'm connecting it across languages now, because in Spanish, gift is regalo, which
Mm.
comes from regal,
Mm.
because like the royal, the kings and queens. And the very first definition I gave about a truth, something that is linked to some fact or reality. Well, what is reality then?
Mm.
And if we look at the root of the word reality, it comes from realis or regalis, regal. Again, we come back to the regal. And I think we utilize that word because we would say, well, whatever the king says, that's true. And that's going to be canon. That's going to be, we have to do that, right? So, how interesting that royalty and reality is connected.
Mm.
Because in yoga, we in this practice of yoga that incorporates the physical aspect and the breathing aspect and the meditation and so on, we call it Raja Yoga. And
Mm.
Raja is like the kings and queens. So this is the yoga of kings and queens. And the very word regal, yeah, connects to real. So it's a yoga of reality as well.
Mm.
And we say that in this style of yoga, it's not about expecting anybody to come and crown you, put a crown on your head. That would be the waiting for an initiation. But not in the times we are living now. We have to self-initiate, and we have to accept that we want to live the path of a Raja Yogi.
Mm.
And the idea in yoga, it's about awakening of the Kundalini energy, which is in the base of the spine. As it rises, we say that it goes into the crown. We call it crown, the top of the head, because that's where the crown is put. But in yoga, it represents also that as this energy, which is linked to consciousness, rises, this is like saying your consciousness rises, you are waking up, and it reaches the crown, you are like a king. Yeah, this is your kingdom. This is your house is your king, is your castle. This is my kingdom. Yeah, this is myself. And it becomes real. So the
Mm.
more consciousness rises, the more you are becoming real, because you are becoming conscious. And when
Mm.
you are not conscious, you are affected by whatever the subconscious is doing, which is generally thinking about the past, rehearsing and remembering, or fantasizing about the future and projecting, and all the expectations and so on. But when we have pain or when we have fear, it's an opportunity to choose, not to choose, to be present, right? And the moment you are present, that's a gift, because you can be real. You can have a neutral perception of what is happening, not influenced by what it was happening in your mind, because you are right here. And the fear that can push you
Mm.
into that place, it can bring you to this, the mind shuts up, you are in silence. So that's a moment where you can appreciate things for what they are.
Mm.
Immediately later, the mind will engage, and you will see lions where there are none. You will see a shadow, and you will think there is a demon or something. No,
Mm.
maybe that's why Halloween is so exciting, because once a year we can all pretend to be monsters and so on. But the thing is, can we choose to go into that state without needing to get afraid
Mm.
or pain? Because if we don't, life brings pain anyway. So we're going to have to experience it, right? But if we can place ourselves in that awe state of reception and openness and ready to see the present and it's a neutral state, then we don't need life to scare us and we don't need life to bring us pain. So if we are just allowing ourselves to choose to do that consciously.
Yeah. I think what you said makes so much sense, that the pain, and I think um, in the work that we do, we keep saying that the pain is actually there for you to become more conscious and be present. It's calling your awareness, your attention to that in order for you to see something in your life, right? And to raise your consciousness and awareness of
Yes.
something, of whatever that might be. And that is the path to, that could be a path if continued and explored, and to bringing our awareness to some of the narratives and beliefs that are currently in the way of us aware of our awareness. Because when we have those kinds of trauma, you're living from automatic behavior patterns, and you're technically not really in the present moment making an aware and conscious choice of how I want to respond to this situation,
Mm.
right? Because then I'm stuck in in a pattern that I don't even know I created out of consciousness. I probably was conditioned. I've continued to do what I thought was, the only way I needed to survive. And therefore, then you're still
Correct.
operating from survival mode instead of being
Correct.
in present mode and saying, okay, fine, this is not the same thing. And so, can I fully and openly be receptive and open to life?
Mhm.
Otherwise, I'm always operating from a defended space, which is an unconscious space, because it happened in the past, it can happen again, and fear is constantly driving it. And that takes me to so much of the understanding after being on this starting Kundalini yoga, was how much of my choices to respond are conscious, how much of my
How
time
much of my choices? What do you say?
how much of my choice to respond is conscious, or am
Ah,
I just doing it from an unconscious automatic state because that's the only way I know, and I don't even know if I was taught or learned it, or I just did it out of survival because that made sense back then.
right.
But we evolve and we grow, and we're no longer, and so much of this we take on in childhood, and today we're adults, and we're probably still doing those same behaviors
Right.
from a very unconscious space, and wondering, and then getting stuck with the frustration that it isn't working for me. And yet we aren't think we're very quick to blame the outside environment than to do the work of the conscious awareness of, um, why am I responding or reacting in this way? Where is it coming from? What is the truth here? The truth is simply, otherwise for us, you said this, therefore I reacted. There isn't any understanding of responsibility and accountability and conscious choice of not having to have that same response, reaction each time. I can do something about it.
I like that word that you use, accountability. Yeah. There is accountability to the actions that we do. And the accountability is going to come anyway because karma, right? We talked about this last week. But maturity implies taking responsibility for what you did. And if you do a conscious choice, if you commit to something, then now there is a responsibility. Now,
Yeah.
if you've committed and you commit fully, okay, now there's a responsibility to that. So this evolution that you're talking about, no, this evolving has to include in a way responsibility, or otherwise there's no maturity there.
And how is that? Is there a connection to that, to truth then?
Well, I think so. Intuitively, the first thing that comes to me is this thing that I mentioned about mathematics and how they will try to study something and then the law, or physics, and then they change the law and they find a new law that adapts better. And well, one possible definition of truth is linked to what was, what is, and what will be. So when we are reading the Mul Mantra, no, there's Ekankar Satnam, yeah, the ending of the Mul Mantra is At Sach Jugat, Sach Hebi, Sach Nanak Hosibi, Sach. And it's talking about everything that is it was said before. He said that was true at the beginning of times, it's true now, it will be true for all the times to come. But that's also a nice definition about truth, because some universal truth would be something that was, that is, and that will be. And that doesn't change. If we are talking about something that is absolutely true, that's not that's not going to change,
Mm,
because if it's changing, then it's only circumstantial or
mm,
temporal. So if we are talking about something that is universal, I think this is a really nice question to ponder. Yeah, what in the universe do I can I see or feel or imagine or perceive that is never changing? That it was always like this. It is like this now. It will continue being like that. And that question, that's a strong question to then reflect back to us as well.
mm,
Because yes, we were talking about us evolving and maturing and taking responsibility for our actions, rewriting our dramas and learning the lessons from the past and so on. Well, one thing you can say is, well, before you had that situation with your father, whatever, you didn't feel like that. And now you feel like that. So there's something false here,
mm,
right? Because it wasn't true before, and it's not, and now it's true. You think it's true. Your father hates you, yeah, whatever. And then it, at some point in history, you have created that fact. Well, it wasn't before. So there's probably some perception here happening. And is that a universal truth? Well, of course not, because we are not, my father is not going to be universal. I'm going to be gone from this planet at some point as well. But if we just take the period of our lives as well, how was I at the beginning? How am I now? How will I continue being? Then we can see many of the things that change in our character, they are all superficial changes.
mm,
My mood, for example, today I may be in a particular mood, and last week I was in a different mood, and they are changing, which means that I am not my mood. There is some essential truth about myself, some true essence of myself that is not aligned with those moods. It's beyond those moods. And then so we have to ask, so what is my essence?
mm,
And then you try to go, well, who am I? How am I? Well, I've always been curious. Okay, all right. So you're a curious guy. Okay, so maybe curiosity is closer to the truth, and it's probably closer than today that you are feeling frustrated or whatever. But maybe it's not even curiosity. So by exploring what qualities have always been with me, even before I was born, that I probably brought them from the previous life, but if I can identify those qualities that are resonating closer to, it's still my individual truth, but even my individual truth has to be closer to this before, now, and after. So somehow navigating all the others which are not, like the moods, we can get closer to the true essence of
mm.
who we are.
Yeah.
How does that sound according to psychology and the true essence of self from psychological perspective?
Yeah, I mean, now it's like I said in previous times that now we're talking about a true self and an essence. Because up until now, psychology, even though it was the study of the soul, its conversation was largely around mind, and the mind is ever changing.
Right. So we are not that thought.
Yeah, we're not the thought. And Buddha kept saying, "You are not your thoughts," right? And he had his own thing of the noble truths and things like that that he proclaimed about, talked about in terms of suffering, and then so psychology therefore come now today. A lot of the questions are around, okay, the true self, the wise mind, and what is the essence of that? And if that is your truth, then what is everything else? Right, and that they are your parts, and then they are parts of you, they're not all of you, and then it brings you back to the essence of wholeness, and that you are the whole, and that's the truth. right? And there is an experience to that. And then once you experience it, that becomes your in, not just your individual truth, but then you're in relation to the universal truth.
Now, now we are talking at the end of the path, because who feels whole, right? In reality, most of us are fragmented,
Yeah.
right? So personalities and with their own interests and
Some of our parts, right?
yeah, yes, yeah. But that's very relevant, yeah, to consider who is the whole that makes all these parts together. If even if I'm not these thoughts,
Mm,
okay, they are part of my experience, so they are probably part of me, even if I am not that. Like
mm,
this body, I'm not this body. Yeah, if I was having this little conversation with my daughters the other day. It's like, well, if because one of the artists that we watch in YouTube, we like her very much. She's incredible artist, and she is missing a finger.
mm,
And we were saying, well, imagine when she had that finger on. If we think that this is our body, that this is part of us, what happens if we lose one finger? Do we lose a part of ourselves? And they were like, no. It's like, then is the body part of ourselves or not? And they're like, yes. So it's like, it was very, very fun, a lot of fun trying to figure out, are we the body or not? No?
yeah.
And so, yeah, if I lose my finger or if I lose my hand, I'm not losing myself. But at the same time, while I have this body and this hand and this finger, that's part of my experience. So as long as it's part of my experience, that's also part of this whole, which is fragmented in a way, no?
Mhm,
Then there is something, um, how is it called? Sadhguru. Sadhguru talks about this in some videos. If I take an apple,
mhm,
I'm not this apple. But the moment that I eat the apple, all the nutrients and the different parts of the apple will be used by my body to create, fibers, muscle, tendons, bones, whatever. And now the apple is part of me.
mm,
So were we ever separate? Or are we now, if we are now together, are were we ever separate? So if we think that we are now together, well, the apple was already together with me before, even if it was not within my body. And then if we are talking about experience, well, okay, where does the experience go? Does it go only until my skin? Because I can feel if somebody passes behind me. So, okay, so maybe if you can feel somebody passing behind you, even if there is no breeze of air or anything, just passing by, when you are in the bus and you are nicely, quietly, and then you notice something strange behind you, and then you turn and there's this dark presence, right? And you feel something is off with this guy, I'm going to step away. I think most people has had this experience. Well, you don't have neurons, with and senses. You don't have senses out there, and yet you can experience that just because your awareness can include that. Yeah, and we in yoga we talk about also fields of energy and so on. But then, where is the limit of my experience? Because if we are saying that's part of me, right? Then is can I expand my awareness and the field of my energy, and then everything that is around this expansion is also part of me? You see how easily this becomes a little bit complicated, no?
yes, absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of what you just said, that can I expand my awareness and my energetic field, where all of this becomes a part of me that takes us to the universal truth of oneness, which that we're one consciousness. And the more awareness and expansion we have of that, the less we are in the egoic mind that sees truth as a very limiting experience of just this body and this thought and this mind,
Right.
and therefore then truth becomes such a large experience that it's possible to experience so much more when we are able to step out of the egoic mind and the realms of this is all there is, and what I am saying and experiencing is the only truth, and etc. Right? And that comes so much from the limitations of our conditioning and the mind itself. And that's when you said something really beautiful earlier, that when there is something and you're afraid, all your senses open and your mind goes off, And in that moment, you're in truth, and you can you become aware of everything. And that's so interesting, that the mind goes off, and that's in the moment that you're fully aware, and that all your senses are on. And yes, of course, then the mind comes back and limits that to the what if and the this and the that and the other dialogues that keep going on. And that to experience truth of oneself, the mind needs to, the more we're able to control the mind and the narratives that are on and on and on in the mind, the more we'll actually fully able to experience this vastness of our awareness and what it can hold.
Yes, yes, but we would throw a caution here from yoga, because if you're trying to control that mind, you may enter into a battle with it. And
Mm,
whenever you fight against anything, you're already lost. So I rather fight for fight for peace than fight against war, because
yeah,
uh, um, that's a very common idea. Yeah, meditation is stopping the mind and controlling our thoughts, and that many people end up frustrated trying to take that path. And also, if mind is part of me, then I'm fighting against myself. So to trying to control it, but then what do we do? If it's not controlled, then what do we do, right?
yeah. So I think the important, what we are working with is awareness, becoming aware of the mind, and then noticing that I'm not the mind and I'm not this thought in this moment, and that I have a choice to either get attached to the thought and go with it, or then what we here teach clients is to say, interesting thought, not right now. Please, take a step,
Yes.
because it's coming from a certain part or sub personality, super ego, someplace, inner critic, but I'm aware of that.
Mm.
I'm fully present in this moment to recognize that there's this banter and chatter in my mind, and this banter and chatter is causing this experience for me that's overtaking what's currently present for me. And I can ask that part to take a step back.
Yeah, exactly. That was so close. The concept of awareness. I had a little realization as I was preparing the course I was doing on the Yoga Sutras on yoga, and I realized that this is like water and oil.
Mm,
When you put a glass and there's water, and you can shake the glass and the water is going all over the place, and then you put a lot of oil, and they don't mix. They
mm,
create to separate textures. I mean, all children do this in when they are little. It's very interesting. But there's another thing that happens. Oil is much more dense,
mm,
and then if you shake the glass, it almost produces no waves.
mm,
The waves are much less. So I felt that the waves of the water, that's the description that the Yoga Sutra, that's a very famous yogic text that we have. They utilize this description of the mind like these waves. They talk about these waves. Well, these waves is like the water, the mind, but then consciousness is like pouring oil on top of it, and
mm,
then it can spread all over. If you are not fighting against the thoughts and suffering the consequences of that fight and fighting with yourself, but just becoming aware of them. Just, okay, mind, what do you want to say to me today? And just
mm,
allowing it. Okay, rather than fighting, I'm going to listen to you right now. I'm going to choose to listen. If you just approach mind directly like that, very often mind doesn't know what to say. And
mm,
it's just like pouring the oil on top of the water, and the waves start to come down. And then we forget about the oil because consciousness comes and goes away, and then the waves start rising and very shaking, and then bring consciousness again, and then the surface becomes much quieter, very much like when we are in a moment of this fright that we have. And but it's like something that we choose to create just by choosing consciousness, to be aware of what is happening also within our minds. I think that's really, really powerful to just concentrate on what is. I think that's the power of mindfulness as well. And many of the yogic techniques are there to help us sustain the level of oil. Yeah, it's like inhaling 8 and exhaling 8, and because you have to inhale 8 steps and exhale 8 steps, the mind is busy counting, so it cannot trap you into its thought. And then by counting consciously, you are aware, and then you wake up, and then you're observing the breath, observing the mind. And so you have triggers to help the consciousness stay there. And then the oil can spread all throughout the surface, right? Especially if we hold that state, counting and breathing for a number of minutes. But that's I think that's a very powerful thing. What you were just talking about this, right? Being in the awareness, it's already helping to calm down the mind.
Yeah. And I think then that awareness is able to process what the truth is
Neutrally.
neutrally,
Yeah.
um, and allows us to slow down from what happened. Because most of us don't know that when an event happens, a thought has interpreted it, it's given the emotion, and we've already reacted, and there's no time between that. There's no, pause. There's no inhale,
Mm.
exhale, create a pause and say, okay, now what just happened here? And can I take that moment to just not react from automatic spaces that are so fast that I'm not even aware that all of this has happened. And that now, when I can bring in awareness or train myself to at least inhale before I react and respond, to ask, wait a second, I can hear my mind going, look, she's doing the same thing again. She always does this to you. And my
Mm.
narrative is gone. And before I can turn around and say, you always do this to me, this is what, that I say, okay, can I ask this part? I hear you, to just take a step back for this moment. So I can, in this moment, make a conscious choice of how I want to respond, not listening to that narrative of wherever it's come from. I mean, in time, we actually help clients also understand what voice is that. Is it your inner critic? You know, and you have a choice then to actually listen to it or not. And that's where I think the whole question of choice comes in, which is such a powerful experience, because most of us, when we say we are helpless or powerless, what we're saying is we don't have choice in our response, in how we respond. Because a lot of people that I meet, like, but I don't have a choice, I have to do it. And I'm like, you do have a choice, but you're choosing to do it this way. And I don't even have the awareness and the consciousness that I'm actually making that choice in every moment. And I was hoping that we could spend the next few minutes talking about that, because a lot of people, we suffer because we do something out of like automatic spaces. And then we say, I'm choice, but I'm like, every moment you are making a choice. The fact that you did that itself says that there was choice in that. To say yes while saying you're choiceless is also a choice, right? And I think that's a space, that a blind spot that a lot of us as the human existence are struggling with. I think with that, I don't know whether there's
Yes,
a
yes.
perspective on
It's,
that.
it's just that, yeah. It's sometimes that choice is kind of, I mean, who really chooses?
Yeah.
Did we really choose that? It's we would have to think about this, whether there was consciousness or not, right? Because we make things, we do them, and you could say, well, you chose to do them, and we would say, well, maybe not, maybe they were just reacting, right? The difference that we were talking about reacting and responding, that comes with in this exact example, right? So somebody does something, and then you say, well, they chose to do that. Well, did they choose that? And then if we want to question that, we would have to even question how much choice actually do we have. Not that there are not no choices, but how much do we really choose consciously and neutrally? Because we talk about free will a lot, but the teachings also say everything has been written already. so so what is it? I think it's both, right? But there is always this constant paradox in the spiritual life. So the moment that you consider that, okay, let's think about what is really really free will, what is really really a choice that I'm absolutely doing, and I can say consciously 100% that was my choice. How many of those are truly there in our lives? I mean, how many of those are absolutely free from any conditioning, from conditioning from your parents, conditioning from your school, from how you were little, how you perceive the opportunities that you can choose, or whatever. We are so programmed right now. Most of our attitudes, and when I say most, this is 99.999 of what we do, even when we think we are conscious, they also come from our own internal programming,
Absolutely.
our personal truth. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that a lot saying that, but isn't it supposed to be that way? And I'm like, yeah, okay, where did you learn that from? And where did that come from? And so we haven't even stopped to understand, and that takes me back to insight, responsibility, accountability, to just taking something to be the absolute truth, and this is the only way it's meant to be, and I'm acting in accordance with that, and therefore feel choices because there's a part of you that says, I may not want to respond in that way. And we aren't even exploring the truth of that voice and where that is coming from. And that the conflict is between what I think it's meant to be, and then there is a voice in me that's saying it may not be right for me, but I'm not listening to then that voice. And what is that voice?
Mm. Yeah, there's all these voices within. Again, coming back to the fragmentation, right? We are
There's
fragmented
also
within.
an intuition, right?
That could be, but there is many voices. Yeah, intuition is one of them. It's interesting. You were um, talking about insight before, seeing within, and intuition is tuition, thought within. So intuition is something that you never learned from that outside. You a part of you from within teaches you in that moment. That's the right thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Inner tuition. That's very significant. There's another way to translate it as well, but let's go with that one. So there is an inner teacher
Mm.
and can tell us what to do in the right moment. And I would say that that teacher is really, really close to the real self,
Mm.
right? So that the closer we get to the real self, the better we hear that voice
Mm.
of the intuition. And it's non-rational, which means that for very rational people, and that's a lot of people, it's very hard to accept that
Mm.
that a voice within us, and we are not, talking crazy here, but a
Mm.
voice within us is telling us, is teaching us, inner tuition, teaching us what to do, and we can choose to do that. But then you would also say, well, did you really choose to do that, or you chose to follow that voice? But is that also a conscious choice and neutral and 100% free from any? It's really, really difficult to say that we actually did this choice 100% free of any conditioning and totally absolute free will.
Right.
Really, really hard.
Yeah. But I think it comes back to knowing that even if I am making this choice, being conscious that I may be making this choice out of conditioning,
Yes, correct. Exactly. And taking responsibility for
and
that as
taking
well. Uh,
responsibility and accountability for that. And
correct.
that's
I'm not perfect. I'm not 100% real. I have my masks. I still wear my masks. But
absolutely,
whatever is the result of this action, I'm going to take full responsibility. I'm going to be accountable for it. Why do? Whatever it has to happen, I will accept the consequences.
yeah.
That's
And
full commitment. Yeah.
yes, and that's fully showing up as authentically and truthfully as you possibly can for yourself in that
Right.
moment.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
That's back to the conversation of truth, that there's so many layers to it, like you said, coming back to individual, collective, universal. And that my experience of that, even with the mass and everything, is to just be aware that, yes, I'm not, there's a lot that I've been conditioned by and, unknowingly, but I'm still making this choice from what I know. And when I know better, I will do better. But from here and now, that's what I do. And I stand by that. I stand by my word, and that I stand by my action. That's my commitment in this moment, with whatever comes along with that is, I accept.
And the commitment to constantly keep doing a reality check on what I think is true and what I think that I know.
Mm.
Constantly keep checking myself. Is that true? Is that a true alignment what I have right now?
Yeah.
And coming back to this concept of what was, what is, and what will be.
Mm.
As I do it also as a meditation. When I close my eyes and I go into meditation, I do this a lot. I explore what part of me has always been before I was born into this body and I have this name Ardaas and I do whatever I do. And right now we are talking, right? But independent of whatever we are doing and all this is all transitory. But
Mm.
if I close my eyes and I go deep within, there is a feeling of existing. There is a feeling of being that I can recognize it's been here before this lifetime. And I can feel that it will carry on. So I try to connect to that as much as I can. And that's the closest I have of an experience of the real self.
Mm.
And then if when I am in a situation where you have to challenge yourself, you have to do a reality check on whether what you are doing is biased, is based on what you think is the most appropriate, but then you can go into that space and find if there is some dissonance or
Mm.
some resonance or some harmony with that part of me, which is the closest I know to reality.
Yeah. I like the word, whether there is dissonance, resonance, or harmony. And that is what you said about alignment. And I think coming back to the earlier words of, is there congruence, coherence, words like that to that experience, which is the truth. Because otherwise, the most active is the conflicts that happen within us,
Right. Like
right?
the voices talking, these
Constant,
fragmented selves. I
constant.
think I think a lot about maturity and life. Sorry for interrupting you. Is about making a concert out of these voices and learning to tune them in, learning to speak to each other, to harmonize and make music out of that, all in balance. And then just you walking around the streets, and there's these instinctive voices, and there's this intuition, and there is this intellectual voices, and there's all these things that are happening, and being able to harmonize them and make music. I think that's there's a lot about that in life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when we sit, and I know that we're closer to the closing of this, that I think the beauty of this truth, uh, uh, it's an invitation for whoever, like you said, you sit with it, and you is to just become aware that all those voices exist, and yet there is a part that can hold, observe all of these, and choose from that space what feels aligned and congruent to that experience of harmony within you, to come closest to your truth and your true self. um,
Yes.
and to operate with the possibility that with of more awareness,
Mhm.
and what that might be when we show up in that way.
Mm. The possible human being,
Yeah,
the becoming.
the becoming. Yeah. And I think this particular question has been the birth of Soul and Science for me. I think as a podcast, as a inquiry. Um, I think it's Ramana Maharishi who says, "Inquiry, ask who am I," right? And that to keep being in that and seeing how close you could come to that part that's truest in your essence, and to experience that in any possible way that we can. um, I think is the essence of that, what which was, will be, and will continue to be from time to come.
Bueno.
So is there any other thoughts, Ardaas, that you would like to share before we um, bring this very interesting um, conversation?
I would say that part of of your work as a psychologist, I can imagine that when a client comes to you is they are in this harmony,
Mm.
and there is these voices within, and some of them they may not even recognize like part of themselves, but they are suffering because of that, and some are more emotional, some are more rational, but they are different parts of themselves screaming at each other,
Mm.
and some have a louder voice than others. And I imagine that your work is like the conductor of the orchestra, who is like, well, let's tune in everybody. And then, that may take a few sessions to tune in, and so that we all play the same, to the same frequency. And then as we are tuning in, then there's some voices that want to be very like the main character, no? And you have to be, well, don't go so much into that emotionality right now. Let's tone it down a little bit. Let's explore it from here, no? And then finding the right balance between these different aspects of the self, and trying to find the integration of the fragmented self.
Yeah.
And yes, the whole is more than the parts. It's like the bicycle. If we see a wheel and a pedal and a frame, that's not a bicycle, right? When they are together, there's something larger than just some wheels and a frame and some pedals. There is a bicycle. The concept of bicycle appears out of everything to put together. Just like we are not this body, we are not this mind, we are not these emotions, we are not these narratives, we are not these thoughts. But when you put them all together, something arises out of that.
Mm.
Now, whether it will be a beautiful bicycle everybody will want to ride, and a nice and a fast one, or a heavy, clunky one that it breaks every minute and you have to change the chain, it will depend on how you maintain it and how you keep it in balance and aligned and all that. And I think that's where yoga comes a lot into aligning this body, mind, and spirit. And when we go into the mind itself within, that's where psychology helps to keep the alignment of the different pieces of the mind and the different voices and subpersonalities also speaking together, so that we can have a nice ride through life and enjoy the scenery, rather than being challenged with the change of gears and the chain is coming out and the wheel is flat now, no? Rather enjoying the ride of life. And there's some bumps, but hopefully our wheel is strong enough that we can go through the bumps, and that's fine. So also to have that resilience, that strength, and those characteristics that we need in the mind and emotions, that we can deal with whatever bumps are in the road as well, because the whole bike is working well, because everything is balanced. So I use a lot of metaphors, but I think mind understands metaphors, and most people listen from the mind. So maybe that's a good idea, no? To feel life as this metaphor of me with my bike, and how is it today? Are my emotions aligned with my body? Is my mind today going in its own line? This kind of thing. Because if for example, the mind goes away, then I am at night, I want to go to sleep and I cannot, because my thoughts cannot stop turning, like these wheels turning in whatever direction they want to go. And I know tomorrow I'm going to be worse physically and emotionally, and even not being able to connect spiritually. So every part has its own function and its importance to the whole.
Absolutely. And I think just to add that into close, when we talk about alignment and balance, um, and therefore it is a triangle of mind, body, and soul, that any one off balance creates the disharmony. So
Hmm.
we have to take care of the body with yoga. We have to look after the mind with, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, therapy, and to take care of our spirit and soul. Uh,
Yes.
and it's only when we're taking care of all three and there is harmony also in all three, where does this does the blooming and the blossoming and the harmony of the orchestra that you talked about sort of create music,
Yes.
and the music is the essence, right, of the self, of the true self, that then shows up in its beauty, like any tree or plant, and we're part of nature, and that's how I see it. Um, and then you're blooming in your essence, because of that glorious balance and alignment. And when you talk about being on a bicycle, it's also again another triangle,
Yeah.
right? And just how important that balance is. And that is the truth. It's that, all the balance and the harmony comes from all three aspects of the human that we take care of, become aware of, and align with each other to live in that alignment and congruence of truth.
And one more thing, the balance is in movement.
Mm,
When you are static on the bike, you fall.
mm.
You need movement in the bike to be in balance. So to never assume that you reach the balance, and also just don't try to get static in your practices or your whatever aspect of yourself, but always understand there is always movement, there's always flow, and you have to continue that movement to keep the balance. So finding the balance in the movement. Before I asked a question, what was, what is, what will be, what thing never changes? And I remember when I asked that question for myself the first time, the first answer that came to me is that everything is in a constant state of change. Is so the only unchangeable factor is that always everything is changing, which is a beautiful paradox, but it also reminds me of this bike. The bicycle has to be in a movement. Life is a continuous movement. If we are too static, or we think we are becoming stable, but stable soon turns to static, and static can become passive, and that can be karmic. So there has to always be a continuous flow.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful what you said, that the truth is that everything's changing and we have to be in a constant state of flow and movement. And to find that when we are in that balance, the movement is with ease and effortless. And that's when we know that we're in aligned with truth and in in the experience in relationship to the universal. Um, and thank you so much for bringing that aspect in that and the metaphor of the bicycle. So with that, I think this feels like a good place to um, truthfully come to a close to this particular conversation around truth. And we welcome everyone back next week, next Friday. And we will be talking about relationship to responsibility, something we talked about today, and from fate to destiny, the path, the journey. So, with that, we say thank you so much for joining us. Please do join us in person. Send us your questions. Interact with us. We're live every Friday, 5:30 p.m. India time and 1 p.m. Portugal time. See you next Friday.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week. So now.